Yeah, no problem.
Do you see the countdown, or is it just me?
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Make Your Marketing Podcast. Today I have with me James Hamilton Healy. He is a publisher, a certified brand story guide, and story brand guide, and my podcast producer. Welcome to the show, James.
Hey, thanks, Pia. Great to be here.
Yeah, so James is one of the many supporters who have convinced me to start a podcast, and I jumped in with his help. He has helped me with strategy as well as producing the show along with many of our other clients. And on this show, James, we basically want to help our audience decide what's working today. Not past, not future, but what can they do today to help their marketing and really get more leads. So we're going to talk about podcasting today, your favorite subject.
I love it.
Yeah. So first, I'm curious, how did you get into podcasting? I think it was by mistake, wasn't it?
Yeah, I definitely stumbled into podcasting. I don't remember how I got the idea of starting a podcast, but I was in recovery and quitting drinking about 7.5 years ago, and I was helping others do the same. And most of the strategies out there were go to rehab, right? Go to rehab. Or join a 12-step program. And my background is in health and fitness and just being a mountain guide and being active and super focused.
Yeah, because you're out there in Montana, right?
Yeah,
That's
in
where you...
Montana, yeah, and I used to have a hiking tour company, and I used to be a mountain guide and everything. And so I understood the importance of, say, nutrition and maybe some sort of yoga. I used to do yoga. I used to teach yoga and everything, and how that could help someone in recovery. And so I started a podcast where I was interviewing experts in the recovery space that were offering alternatives to the traditional 12-step program, rehab method. So it was great finding all these people who had these different things about nutrition or special breathing techniques or yoga or whatever it was that would help people, because especially with recovery, it's individual. Everyone needs a different kind of plan for themselves. It needs to be kind of custom, and so not everyone is going to relate to just 12 steps.
Yeah.
That's how I looked at it. Yeah, and then I was doing my own podcast, and I reached out to some folks and said, hey, I figured out this podcast thing. You want to start one? And away you go.
That's awesome.
Had a business doing podcasts.
And you've been helping our clients ever since. So the big question that everyone asks is why? Why podcasting? Why now? And what's it going to do for my business? I mean, is it just kind of a side hustle, hobby? You know, what are the powerful things that a podcast can do?
There's so many powerful things that I learned, by default, that I didn't understand even when I started my podcast. But first of all, it positions you as an expert and an authority in your space, much like publishing or writing a book would do.
Yeah.
In today's world, writing a book or having a podcast has more value than having a master's degree. So
wow.
How much money people spend on getting
a
master's degree.
Well, and I have to say,
go write a book.
And I have to say that the difference for me, because I didn't write a book, is that once it's written, it's automatically out of date, so to speak. But with podcasting, just like this show, we want to keep people current every week.
And podcasting is current, and it's easier than writing a book.
Yeah.
Right? You just have to
Yeah.
put some audio into a
Yeah.
microphone, like
Yeah.
we're doing. So
Yeah.
it has the same sort of panache, but without the effort of writing a book. And you can
Yeah.
take your audio recordings, and then that's the other, I was going to say, the other big benefit is take those audio recordings and you spin them into all kinds of different content. They're your
Right.
blog posts, they can be chapters in books, they can be social media posts, all kinds of different things just by speaking and then transcribing the audio and editing and
Right.
adding some images or whatever. And like we're doing now, we're creating videos too. So we put it on YouTube. So
Yeah. I have a running list of benefits of podcasting just for myself, because I've had this conversation with so many people. Every day I have a conversation with people, like, convince me. I'm like, okay, let me pull out my list, right? So so a web agency, one of our critical ones is search engine optimization, because podcasts interviews are searchable and you can rank on page one now if you have a podcast. So just like blogging and that kind of stuff. And then the other, you mentioned the authority, right? So closing sales. I've had several instances where I've been doing sales calls on Zoom, and they'll notice my fancy mic that James got me set up with, and they're like, wow, do you have a podcast? I said, I do. And they're like, automatically, you just, you level up. So, and then also creating partnerships, working with other companies that can get you leads when they share your podcast and so forth. So there's so many reasons.
oh yeah, for sure. And it's an amazing connector, especially in the past year with this whole COVID thing and everything, trying to connect with people and not having traditional events that you can go to, or networking meetups and all those sorts of things that we're used to. If you want to connect with someone, you can invite them to be on your podcast, and 99% of the time people are going to say yes. Like, I don't know who's going to say no to an interview, to a podcast.
Yeah, it's like having, like, let's meet for coffee, right? And just have a chat.
And you're just going to have a conversation like you would while you're having coffee.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like it's much like you were at that networking event and you're saying, well, what do you do? What do you do? How do you help people? And that sort of thing. And just having that conversation and recording it and then sharing it. Those little nuggets of wisdom that come out of that conversation, sharing it with the world or whoever.
And I love when we're on a call, James, talking to a potential podcasting business. You talk about how intimate audio is. Can you talk a little bit more about the psychology around that?
Yeah, for sure. Audio has a very high empathic connection. Like, you can sense emotions from people's voices. And we all know this. Like, we've learned long ago, if you're in any sort of marketing or sales, right? Smile when you're on the phone call, because they can hear you smile. And it's the same thing with recording a podcast. There's something about audio and audio alone that connects with the brain, because your brain has to kind of formulate this picture of what's happening. And that's why radio shows worked so well back in the day, whether it was The Lone Ranger or War of the Worlds. Like, people really got into it because they really had to focus and think about what was happening. There's kind of this thing about your brain when it's using, it's like a computer program, right? Like, or your computer is using two programs at the same time if you're using audio and video, and it's just not as efficient, versus if your brain's just using one program, using the audio only, it's more efficient, and there's actually more emotional connection.
Yeah. And because we're not commuting as much to the office, it's still powerful because you can take it anywhere and everywhere, right? On a walk, at the gym, doing laundry, whatever, cooking dinner. And I think statistics show that people will listen to a podcast episode throughout versus a video that where they kind of like they're tied to their phone or desktop or laptop.
Yeah, a video, I think, has, like, if you can get someone to watch a video for 7 minutes, you're doing pretty good.
Yeah.
3 minutes is really good.
Yeah.
A podcast, people will typically last at least a half an hour. You know, it's kind of that time length of, it used to be a commute, but even still, it's like taking the dog for a walk, or walking on your treadmill, or riding your Peloton, whatever you're doing, right? So you're going to take that chunk of time and just dedicate it to that piece of content. As long as it provides you the value that you're looking for, you're going to stick around and come back next week.
And what is the value that you're creating for your audience? Aside from how it helps you and your business, you know, what kind of value should you think about creating when you're thinking about starting a podcast?
Well, you're trying to help people work through their problems, you know, whatever it is. Like I was doing with the addiction recovery, right? Helping people move from here to there, from being addicted to a better life of being sober, versus or something like what you do with yours, with the filtering through all the marketing options that are out there for a small business, and they can't do them all because they're constrained by budgets or time or staff or whatever it is. They have to pick and choose the right ones for them. So you can quickly kind of help people see that you're the educator and advocate for their success, right? You want to educate and help them along, and you can do that through just some audio content, and then steering them towards any sort of maybe downloadable cheat sheets or your website or further resources that can help you as well.
So the fine line or the filter that goes through all of this, whether you're blogging or podcasting or creating any sort of content, is that's you're creating content that will solve people's problems. And you're being seen as the authority, and it's evergreen. So when you're thinking about marketing your business, you know, I think about pay-per-click ads. You know, as soon as you stop paying it, it stops. The leads stop. You know, Facebook and social media, you know, the percentage of people that see that content are so small, and the idea that they're going to see it again is nothing. So this lives on in perpetuity, whether you like it or not, online. So, you know, podcasting is not new, but it's what's working today. What are some of the misconceptions that you've heard when people object to starting a podcast or even talking about starting a podcast?
Most of the time, it's, I don't know what to talk about. The people will say, I don't have anything to say.
Yeah, it's all been said.
It's all been said before. But they do have something to say, and you don't have to have a long podcast. It doesn't have to be a 2-hour-long episode. A lot of times it can just be 10 minutes of content. I had a great idea, or I ran into this. For example, I gave a Toastmaster speech this morning, and it was a 6.5-minute speech about taglines and how important taglines were. And some of the members of the group didn't even know what a tagline was.
Wow.
But I just had to give them the anchor of what the tagline is, why it's important to have it clear, and this sort of thing. And you can do that in a short podcast. You can have interviews with people who can bring value to your listeners that maybe you didn't know about before, right? It's new to you as well. But you're connecting your listeners with that value piece. And there's a lot of ways you can fill a weekly podcast with content. It's really not that hard. And then I would say the next toughest piece for most people is finding the time to sit down and do it.
Yeah.
As you can probably attest. But if you just chunk the time and have some help with the putting the pieces and parts together, that would make it more consistent. So staying consistent. There's a lot of room for podcasts still. I think they're up to about almost 2 million registered podcasts on Apple Podcasts.
Right.
Only about 800,000 of them are active.
Because the others are just, they just create a podcast and then they forget about it.
They create one episode or whatever it is, and then they just never go any further. So you can still be a pretty big fish in a small pond versus blogging 300 million blogs.
So what I would encourage the listeners to do is just do a few minutes of research on your competitors. Do they have a podcast? Chances are no, they don't have a podcast. And then the next question is, what could I help in my content with a podcast? So, it could be any industry. I don't care what industry, what service, what product. Everyone has content for a podcast. And it's just a mindset thing, right? It's like, I'm just here to help and educate and hopefully entertain.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and you made me think of something else too. You can think of podcasting as narrowcasting versus broadcasting, right?
Yeah.
We're creating a message that's going out to a very narrow, specific audience. It's not a big broadcast that's going out. It is available to the entire world, but that's not our audience. If we are a grizzly bear researcher and we want to give some tips on grizzly bears, about Yellowstone Park opening up here, they're talking about bears. We could create a podcast that's going out to the other 300 grizzly bear enthusiasts in the country.
Right.
And it's like having those people in an auditorium every single week.
Yeah.
Right? And some people get really obsessed with the number of downloads and I need thousands of people listening and that sort of thing. No, you just need the right people listening, consistently, and that's all it takes. It's really finding that small tribe. It's like the whole thing about 1,000 true fans and whatever it is. You don't really need a giant audience.
So you've convinced our listeners to start a podcast. How do they start? Because I know there's different options. There's DIY, there's, courses that you could take, and then there's done for you services. So depending on, I guess, time, money, all those good things, what are the options out there?
There are definitely courses you can take out there that will help you start a podcast. That's what I did, was take a course and go through all that. And that can it can take some time. Each week, your episode is going to take a chunk of time, especially at the start, until you get your systems and that sort of thing down. Most people I've found, it's really hard to maintain that.
That's what we found, huh?
Because having a podcast is not your main income source. It's really rare anymore, especially maybe in the early days of podcasting. You could grow a big audience and get a lot of sponsorship or something. But it's more the top of your sales funnel. If we were to talk about sales funnel,
awareness
sort of thing, right? We're introducing people to who we are and getting a very close personal connection to them and what we offer and how we can help them and getting them into our world. And so it's going to take some time and effort and consistency, just like having a blog or sending out a weekly email newsletter or something.
Or search engine optimization, or...
It's a long game. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Just like SEO. So it's better to have someone help you. So you can do something like You just record the audio, record the interviews, and then hand it off to someone who cleans up the audio, makes sure the volumes are leveled up, and
Yeah.
posts it and does all that sort of thing.
I think it's important to have an accountability partner, even if you're not paying someone to edit your podcast, but having kind of your tribe where you can spitball ideas, you can have them listen to it, because that's going to keep you interested in going and producing these.
Yeah, for sure. And if you get some good feedback, it just gets better. And I
Yeah.
think going back to one of the hangups a lot of people have is, I'm not going to sound any good on audio. I don't know how to interview people or whatever it is. And it's just that piece of you have to start somewhere.
Practice, practice, practice.
You're going to get better as you go.
Well, just a personal note, I have been a keynote speaker. I've gone to networking and all that stuff. And I'm actually a speech major. And I still get the jitters, I still get the jitters and I'm nervous, but I know that with practice, just like anything else, I'll get better. And, it's interesting to study other podcasts, look at what my competitors are doing and see how I can add value.
Yeah. And one of the huge bonuses too, with just the audio piece, if you're just doing an audio podcast, I know we have a video going here, but you can edit out your flubs.
Yeah.
Pretty easily.
Yeah. James knows how to make me sound really good.
We work hard to make sure everything sounds awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'd love you to share some stories of clients that we've worked with to help them get into the podcasting world. What are some great successes that you've seen?
Sure. Like I was saying earlier, like it's hard to get like big sponsorships for, mega downloads or whatever. The most important thing you can do is connect with your ideal audience by providing them that value and by interviewing or finding connections to resources that they might be interested in. So one of our clients started a podcast. He didn't really know where to start with his content. He wanted to start a podcast. How should I present the content I know, which was marketing? He's another story brand guy like me who wanted to help people in the marketing world to understand marketing, which was very, or business world to understand marketing, which is very general. They said, well, what's your background and who do you want to help? Right? Like that's a big piece.
That's a huge question. Yeah.
Huge question. Who do you want to help? And so he is a former undersheriff and federal officer in law enforcement. And so he started interviewing guys who had also been in that space, who had left and started businesses, or who had businesses that supported law enforcement and military as well. So it's called the Public Safety Innovators Podcast, and he interviews people who have super cool drone technology or training resources,
How fun.
whatever it is, that are helping support law enforcement and military, especially as they're transitioning from their career in law enforcement into maybe a career like he did. It's as a marketing agency, or maybe they want to be in private security or something, but they don't know anything about it. So he helps connect those pieces and those dots. Well, he quickly got plenty of business for his marketing agency from these companies, these guys who had started their company with the drones, who didn't know that much about marketing, but they knew that law enforcement needed this particular drone technology. And so suddenly he's like so busy.
Yeah.
He can't keep up with it. He's actually starting to help coach a lot of these guys into starting their own businesses now.
Yeah. It's amazing how it can spin off. Yeah.
A spinoff from that. So again, that's a very small niche audience, but he was able to really stand out in that audience because there weren't a lot of podcasts for those people.
What are some of your favorite podcasts, James? I'm curious. Doesn't have to be related to marketing. I'm just, there's so many fun ones that I stumble on. And I know that my favorite right now is Bigger Pockets, just because we're real estate investors now.
I know. It's so interesting. You can have a podcast in so many different spaces. It doesn't have to be marketing or business. But one of my favorite podcasts is it's called Story Pirates, and it's
Oh, I love the title.
it's a
I'm going to have to write that down.
yeah, it's a kids story podcast, and I only because my son is 7 and he loves podcasting. Like I introduced him to podcasting, and he loves stories podcasts. You can play these stories, and they're anywhere from 15 minutes to the Story Pirates show is actually probably 40 minutes long because they do 2 different stories. The stories are submitted by listeners, which means kids.
That's
write
awesome.
Up stories, and then there are like these actors who like act out the whole story. They make it up. They make up music and songs and all kinds of stuff. It's so fun. And he loves to wake up every morning and listen to Story Pirates. And so that's one of our traditions.
I love that kids are listening to podcasts. That's amazing.
It's like, and we stumbled across this by driving back and forth to visit my family in Minnesota from Montana, right? Like 1,000 miles in a car, and I don't want them sitting there with an iPad the whole time. So we just listen to the stories together.
That's amazing. Yeah, so for my listeners, if you have a favorite podcast, I'd love you to share because I'm constant. It's like a book club, right? It's like I have this long list of books I got to read. Now I got this massive podcast list.
I got a long list of podcasts. I wish I had more time to listen to those. That's one of the challenges is it is a bit of a time suction.
Well, I know that you've done great work with us, and this is a new podcast. And I'm excited to do it for many years to come. Thank you so much for your time. Before we go, is there anything that we haven't touched on that you think our listeners should know about, not just why they should start podcasting, but giving them some motivation to make that move?
Yeah, I would say don't worry about the sound of your voice. Some people worry about
Good tip. Yeah.
Don't worry about not having content. Make sure that you are getting what you have out there as value, and it doesn't have to be long. It's great little nuggets of wisdom that, like you said, are evergreen. They're out there all the time. Someone can stumble upon your podcast 2 years from now and start to learn from you.
Yeah.
You just never know when that's going to happen.
And your competitors are not doing it, trust me. And even if they are, if they're a unicorn, they're not doing it with your voice and your story and your point of view.
Yeah, especially for smaller to medium-sized businesses in a local market, you can basically be the expert with your own local radio show, which is online. People used to do this all the time. They used to go into the local radio studio and have their own kind of show. I mean, that's how Dave Ramsey got started. Now you can do it yourself. And maybe you're the only chiropractor with a health and wellness show in your entire town.
Yeah.
Whatever it is.
That and TikTok, right? I've seen chiropractors on TikTok. That's my next move. Don't tell my kids. Anyway, well, thank you so much, James. You've been a lovely guest, and I appreciate all the great tips that you've shared.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you so much for having me.